I'm Neil Graham, and on episode 122 of the Lowdown Radio Show, the topic is the star-crossed Damon HyperSport, the motorcycle that promised 200 horsepower, 200 miles per hour, and a 200-mile range from its electric propulsion system. 200, 200, 200. Catchy, easy to remember, and seemingly irresistible for investors who poured tens of millions of dollars into the Vancouver startup. A startup that has now gone bust without having produced a single motorcycle. Michael Uhlarik did 2 stints at Damon, and he's here to share his experiences on how and how not to design a motorcycle company. Michael, it's great to have you again. And this time we're talking about a project that's not at arm's length. It's a very personal thing that you were involved in the Damon motorcycle. And I just want to go back to the very beginning. When were you first aware of the Damon motorcycle? Because you weren't involved right at the beginning professionally, but when did you first see it?
Well, I first became aware of it through an article in the Canadian newspaper Globe and Mail, which had an article showing black and white photograph, like 2 guys in BC are making, safety systems for motorcycles. And I thought, Canada, 1 BC? Oh, that's unexpected. And then they had successive more and more press as they moved towards making their own vehicle. And they presented the original HyperSport prototype to the press. And at the time, I was representing engines engineering from Bologna, and I was seeking projects for them for R&D. And so I went to the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, in Las Vegas in 2020. To specifically to seek them and 2 other potential clients out. And that was the first time I saw it in person.
And I think just a bit of background here is, you were born in a northern mining town in Ontario.
I was.
And your parents were immigrants. And most of your professional career has happened abroad, or much of it has happened abroad, Yamaha and other companies in Europe. And you've always wanted to build stuff here, haven't you? Hasn't that been one of the driving things in your career?
100%. I don't think it's a controversial thing to say that most people are proud of the place they're from.
Yes.
I'm immensely proud of Canada. I'm grateful to my parents for, coming here and giving me this birthright. I think Canada is exceptional in many ways, and I think that we do really exceptional work. And we do it quietly. Ironically, you asked that question. Behind me are 2 posters of projects that I tried to kick off, which was to manufacture, 2-wheeled vehicles in Canada. And they didn't succeed because it's super hard business. Look, to your point, I'm, of my 51 years, I've spent 26 of them in the motorcycle industry, mostly abroad. And even while working here in Canada, it was for mostly, companies outside of Canada, American, European, Japanese, Chinese, Indian, etc.
Yeah.
Because there are more than 1,000 motorcycle brands in the world. It is a highly, highly competitive space. It's very hard to make a reliable motorcycle, even in 2026. It's even harder to distribute it, market it, and be profitable. Margins are typically 10, 12%, which isn't great considering.
If you're fortunate enough to have a margin.
If you're fortunate enough to be profitable, your margin is 10, 12% on average. And the costs to get there are eye-watering. They're automotive. They're hundreds of millions of dollars to make 12%, which is why it's so hard, and which is why, so many startups in this space fail, and startups in every space fail. And let's be clear, traditional OEMs in this space fail too. And that's the point. It's really hard to do. So back to, Canada. When I first encountered Damon, they had raised a lot of awareness. They had raised some serious money, like 7 figures at that point, low 7 figures, but still millions. And, they were at the biggest products show probably on the planet, with a product that had crowds, 5 people deep. And they were co-presenting with, QNX BlackBerry, which is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And they won awards and prizes. People were excited about this thing that came out of Vancouver. And it was a motorcycle. It was a sport motorcycle. So, yeah, it was extremely engaging. It was very exciting.
I mean, I think it's important to contextualize it because so often, those of us, we sit back and we look at others and we sort of cross our arms and go, well, I knew that wasn't going to work and we all do it. It's a human characteristic, but it's so much different when you're involved with something. Now let's take a step back to that first Damon HyperSport that was drawing the crowds 5 deep. It was kind of a placeholder motorcycle. Now that's my word. Now you tell me if that's accurate or not. It was a Yamaha R1 chassis with some existing propulsion system. But the claims were pretty significant, and it was the 3x200 claim, as I call it, 200 miles per hour, 200 horsepower, and 200-mile range. Based on that prototype, those numbers were purely speculative, correct?
Sure. And let me be clear. That's not uncommon in the automotive space, right? Tesla comes out with their first serious car, the Model S, in 2013. It's a mock-up. Turns out, we find out 12 years later that first Model S was a Mercedes CLS. It was a Mercedes that they had rebodied and put their prototype powertrain in. And that's the car you see in all the, business press, in the video clip of it going on the California wine country. It's the gray one with the black nose. And they went out and said 200-mile range, 0 to 60 faster than a 911 turbo, da 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 da.
Yeah.
So they made those claims. And by the time the car came out, it was obviously a completely different vehicle. Looked sort of the same to the untrained eye, but it's a completely different vehicle, completely bespoke. The top of the range vehicle, yes, could just about do 200 miles of range, but the vehicle they sold the most of couldn't do anywhere close to that. But that's okay. It's like when Porsche or Yamaha, let's stick to motorcycles, when KTM or someone says this vehicle can do, Paris-Dakar and well, sure, under certain conditions, or
Right.
Sport Bike X can put out 221 horsepower on a dyno with no resistance, optimal engine temperature. The consumer understands that. And I'm not making excuses for outrageous claims. And Damon was definitely out there. But I think what needs to be put into context is everyone understood that what they saw was a concept model. And I knew that it had an R1 chassis because I worked for Yamaha and I'm a professional. And I was there in person, on my knees, got down.
You were that guy, weren't you?
I was that guy.
Yeah.
I was that guy taking pictures, looking under the skirts of the motorcycle. And I mean, up close, I could see there's an aluminum cast chassis underneath a bunch of plastic pieces. So I thought, okay, I see what they are doing. And I didn't really think anything untoward about it. I'm like, okay, this is what it takes to get something out on the show stand.
Because you need just for those of us who don't do this, I would assume that to get money from people, you need a physical thing. You can show all the CAD or illustration or anything like that, but do you need a thing?
You do. And it's true even in non-physical. If you're trying to raise money for a software startup, you need to have a mock-up of the software.
Right.
The physical thing of software is a demo. It's buggy. There's some things that don't work. Most of the features aren't done yet, but enough to show an investor, this is what it'll feel like when you use this software, and this is what it can do. Oh, it's mocked up. It's mocked up. They do it in software. They do it in hardware. The only place where you can't fake is like medicine. Like if you're claiming to have created a cure for something, you have to at least show lab results that indicate that it's heading that way. And this is kind of the same thing. It's a lab-born vehicle that says, look, we have a thesis, a hypothesis of this business. And in Damon's case, the hypothesis was, we think there is a market for people who want a high-performance electric motorcycle. And here's the part that never gets rehashed, and I think it's important. most of the people who were excited about the Damon HyperSport were like, I can't remember the exact number, but a huge proportion of them had never owned a motorcycle in their lives. They were not motorcyclists. They were attracted to the fact that it was a modern 21st century vehicle among vehicles that they perceived as novices to be old ideas. And chief among them was the shift, what Damon called shift, which was the adjusting handlebar, adjusting foot pegs. So at the touch of a button, you could make it more upright.
Yeah.
Foot pegs came forward and up, handlebars came up and back. So it went from for those of you who remember the old sport touring class, it went from something like the riding position of a VFR, or a FJ, to the more aggressive riding position of a CBR 600R or Yamaha R6.
Yeah.
That was not new in and of itself. Yamaha Morpho did that as a concept back in 1989. But here it was being executed and you could touch it. You could get on the bike and demo it. And the fairing came up and the handlebars came up and the foot pegs went forward. That was cool. People liked that. That it went from somewhat of a Aprilia Tuono to an Aprilia RSV4
Yeah.
magically at the touch of a button. And it had radar forward and back. And it had a collision avoidance system of sorts. They called it Halo, which was the kind of thing you have on fighter planes, which is like, along the rim of the fairing of the windscreen were these LEDs. And if someone was getting too close to you on either the left or the right or behind you,
You could kill them.
you got this little visual cue and the handlebar grips vibrated. So left side, left grip vibrated. That's cool. That's genuinely new. And at 2020, there was talk about adaptive cruise control. And here was a startup saying, we've packaged all of this stuff into a pretty attractive, sport motorcycle, and it's electric. That was very, very much a big part of the attraction to the Damon prospect.
So when you had the opportunity to become involved in Damon, that must have been pretty exciting. So take me through that. How did that happen?
I think it's a unexciting story for anyone on the outside. For me, it was very exciting. As I said, I was selling engineering and design services for longtime friends and partners in Italy, and so I'd started that engagement process. Meeting with them pretty regularly, getting a sense of the program, getting a sense of them as people. At that point, I was dealing exclusively with the COO and the CTO, so engineers. I was dealing with engineers because we were selling engineering services.
Yeah.
And it's the typical sales funnel kind of stuff. Like, what are your goals? That's when I first heard about the 200, 200, 200. And I was like making notes, and I still have that notebook, and I'm just like, my note to self was underlined ambitious.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was treating them like a client and telegraphing this to E&E. They requested they made an RFP. We submitted a quotation, and then they asked for some amendments, back and forth. And then this went on for a year, 9 months, let's say, 9 months, long time. So I had signed mutual non-disclosure. I had access to pretty much everything on the technical side. We had produced a quotation. We produced an amended quotation based on detailed technical requirements. And it was in my conversations with the 100+ engineers in Italy who've been working with every major OEM on the planet for 4 decades that were like raised eyebrows, like, I don't know if these targets are achievable. And these are, what Italians are like. They're ambitious and optimistic, and they're like,
And
this is great. This is cool.
When an Italian says it may not be achieved,
Well, there was
you listen.
But they had raised another round of several millions and were aggressively pursuing, the safety tech and getting patents awarded. And it was like, well, okay, they're serious. And then, like I said, I don't recall the exact timeline, but some months in, like a good almost a year, I had kind of gotten to the point where I thought they're not going to work with us. Like they either don't want to or they can't or whatever. And it was, I got a phone call after a follow-up meeting directly from Dominic Kwong, who was the co-founder and at that time COO, who said very directly, "Hey, listen, I know we just talked, but would you be open to working for us?" And I said, "Well, I've been trying to, you know." And he goes, "No, no, no. You come and work as like join Damon." And it was a very short call. It was like 10 minutes. It's always nice to be asked. Never feels bad when someone says, "Hey, we like you and we'd like you to work for us." That then went on for about 2 weeks. And then they started, calling me and we had meetings. I met the CEO, Jay, and, virtually. And this is the middle of pandemic, right? Lockdowns,
Right.
nobody's traveling anywhere. Um, and then they held out the chair and they said, "Look, it's head of design. You build the team. We don't have this experience. This is where the project's at. Ridiculously short timeline, but we've got money. We've got ambition. We've got some pretty good people here. Join us. Together we can rule the galaxy." And who would say no?
Yeah.
Like, it's a company in your home country. People you've been talking to for at that point for a long time. I really liked Dom, still do. And full disclosure, we're friends and we have been colleagues in other adventures. So I immediately took a liking to him. Um, and I had a lot of conversations with my wife, and I had a lot of conversations with the owner of E&E, who is like an uncle to me. I've known half my life, and it was him that turned it over. He was the one who said, "Michael, you have to do this." This is a passionate man, engineer, devoted his life to motorcycles, and he just said, "You have to do this. Like, come on, it's a sport bike in your home country,
Yeah.
and it's an amazing opportunity." So I went for a long walk on the beach because it's where I live. And I called up Don and I said, "Okay, let's go."
The Lowdown Radio Show is presented by advrider.com. Become a site supporter and receive our biannual magazine. advrider.com. Companies are always very different inside versus looking in, although you had obviously experience and you had access to technical stuff. But once you got inside, Damon, once you were running the design department, what did you find? And I'd like you to address this comment that you made where you said there was a lack of process discipline. No, I don't know what that means. So I'm hoping you can explain what that means.
So this is not unique to startups. I've been in a lot of mature multi-billion-dollar corporations that lack process discipline. Process discipline is what means what it says is that discipline, like, we're going to go through step A, we're going to go then to step 2, B, then C, then D, right? No brainer. Except a lot of times what happens is you go through A, then B, then back through A, then B, then C, then back to A. And it's like, or, you're at step C, and then someone who has not been part of that project comes in and makes a comment, and then you're in step 8.5 because it's like,
Right.
"Oh, well, we're still going forward, but we want to also adjust this other thing." A great example, I worked for Derby, which is was a Spanish brand, part of the Piaggio group. They hired me somewhat parallel to Damon. They hired me to do a concept model for the Barcelona motorcycle show. It was like October when they contacted me. The show is in May, like first week of May. That's really tight. But it was like the same situation. "Look, we really want to work with you. It's the Piaggio Group. It's Derby. Oh my gosh, they wanted to do something really ambitious. We've got the money. Let's go." Negotiation and details and scope took till basically Christmas break to get done. So we really started in January. We had 3 months to design, model, and fabricate a concept vehicle. That's insane.
Yeah.
I should have said no. But I was 29, 30, something like that. So you
Well,
go,
but there are certain things in life you just can't say no to. It's ridiculous. And I think this is the point I'm trying to get at.
yeah.
It's ambitious. Maybe even it's absurd, and maybe even it's dumb. But if we kept saying that to everything, I wouldn't have made any films. I mean, most of the interesting, or having a kid, like, that notion of like, well, we'll wait until our finances are set. Well, no one ever does that. And if they are, they're idiots because you're 83. So, I mean, the point is sometimes you just got to run, don't you?
Well, and that's it. And so, like, it's really important for people to understand, like, I was trained formally in Canada and the UK, but I was really trained professionally by Yamaha. The Yamaha Corporation through GK Design and just the Yamaha system gave me the discipline. It taught me you go A, B, C, D. And if you have to go back from D to C, the project's a failure and you start over. They have really rigid, and this is why the Japanese dominate. It's just a fact. 1 in 3 motorcycles sold is a Honda. 50% of the motorcycles sold in the world are Japanese. And it's not for lack of competition from other brands. Um, you the discipline part is so important.
So
Um,
what did you find inside Damon?
so what I found inside Damon was the typical run, 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 run. Everything was sprint. And and those who are watching and listening who come from maybe other industries, that term sprint is used with pride in software development and in startup lexicon. We're doing sprints and then we do retros like retroactives and this like whole lexicon of how to do stuff quickly. And I guess it works. But in hardware, it doesn't. It just like we're in Canada, there's a limited season. You know, we being Damon had a headquarters in Vancouver where they did all the software and electronics for the hardware for software was done in-house. That moved very quickly, very promptly because humans involved were all in the same place and, end to end. But on the vehicle side, they had stuff being done in Switzerland by one supplier. They had stuff being done in California. They had stuff being done sort of here and there. And that's fine. But it's hard because different time zones and, it just takes little things, little kinks in the carpet like that to trip things up and cause delay. And then and that would be bad enough, or bad. That would be difficult. But then you add on to it the super compressed timeline. So when I start, I'm told literally my first full week, the hyperdrive, as they called it, which was basically the mechanical package underneath. We're signing this off next Monday or Tuesday, like a week. You have 1 week to affect any design changes to the thing. I'm still familiarizing myself.
You don't know everybody's name yet.
I don't know anything. I don't know. That's not true. I knew a lot, but your point is well made. I was meeting team members daily that I'd never met before.
Yeah.
And so being disciplined, I said, well, all right, I'm going to take 2 days to just download from people. What is critical? What can be touched? What can't be touched? What exists? What is virtual? And then 3 days, super, super quick. So I had one designer on staff that was there when I joined. I had him use while I was getting the sort of the background, those 2 days, those 2-3 days. I had him start sketching really broad, very abstract concepts, deliberately abstract, because we just wanted to find a flavor. Um, the company that I had joined had no prior history to design. That doesn't mean they didn't have designers. It doesn't mean that they didn't have ideas and opinions about design. What I mean is they didn't have a culture of design within the company. They had a culture of engineering and software, which was great and mature. And so when I presented this idea, like, look, I got 1 week to do something. This is the process. We're going to do some abstraction. We're going to pick up feeling, a vibe in today's, lexicon. Then I will figure out what can be changed. And then I will try in a very conservative manner to apply that vibe to the surfaces of the hyperdrive. This went over like a lead balloon. I don't want to call people out because it's not reasonable. This is not that kind of show. The leadership was confused, rightly so. I probably pushed too fast, but I was told I had a week. So
I mean, it doesn't sound unreasonable to me. Why would someone take umbrage at some sort of structure?
No, that wasn't the structure, wasn't the problem. The problem is we showed them the vibe imagery and it was pretty out there. And they were just like,
Oh, I see. Okay.
right away, the leadership was like, actually sent me a text. I'm starting to question, like, I actually got that text message. I'm questioning, like, basically hiring you.
Lovely.
That's a great way to start.
A great way to start.
And I said, I then reiterated the process. We're starting wide in order to get narrow.
And
And,
sorry, let me,
it was
Michael, I just want to jump in. Now, when you say that, were you wedded to this, to the bike that appeared in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electric Show? Were you wedded to that as a kind of design, what's the word, directive, or as an overview, or were you free to break from that? How does that work?
well, clearly not, because there were hundreds or maybe at that point already over 1,000 reservation holders, and the reason in automotive you present a concept model is to generate interest because you think there's a case there, and Damon demonstrated there was. Many millions of people saw that vehicle virtually, and hundreds of thousands of people commented on it, and several, eventually 3,000 people put money down. So that original bike set something which you have to respect. That's what people want. Now, we couldn't make what people saw at Vegas. It was too compact. There were a bunch of other issues. It was it was a test balloon,
Yeah.
a weather balloon. Now on package with the correct powertrain inside and, something capable of 200 horsepower and something capable of, in theory, 200 miles an hour, 320 kilometers an hour. That's a lot of battery, liquid cooled, very sophisticated, very high revving, is a completely different package. Longer, wider, taller, seat was lower, like totally different. Apples and oranges. I had to respect that original design created by a guy named Pichego. Really quite a really nice guy, really good designer. But map it onto this new package. And that might sound easy, but it's not. You can't just like, oh, well, I'll just stretch and morph it. Like it looked weird if I did that or we did that.
Were the two being the one being these very aggressive goals in terms of horsepower and aerodynamics, which we'll get into in a minute, and then the other is to keep a design look that's similar to the one that's presented. I mean, it sounds that these two were incompatible.
Well, absolutely they were.
Okay.
And again, not to make excuses, but it's pretty common, in the automotive world, automotive and motorcycle world, to present something as a concept and say, this is what it's going to look like. I mean, we're all familiar with that, right? Concept vehicle comes out, everyone goes, it's gorgeous, and then the production version comes out later, and you're like, oh, a little disappointed. Proportions are different. Yeah,
Yeah.
the original concept, like the our generation, you know, you look at the concept model for the original Beetle, the new Beetle, as it was called, in 1995 at the Detroit Auto Show. I was there. I was in Detroit when they unveiled it. And there were Lamborghinis and Ferraris and crazy things from Corvette. Nobody cared. Everyone was at the VW booth looking at a model. People were literally writing checks to VW America for a car that didn't exist because it was a model. When the original version, the 2000, I think, or 1999 new Beetle came out, it was totally different because it's a Golf. It's a Golf dressed up as a Beetle, because that's how you make money. The vehicle shown as the concept vehicle was a caprice, an artistic interpretation with
Yeah.
no limitations. Does it work? Is there a motor? How big is the fuel capacity? Who cares? And so the same thing applied here. They made a demonstration. It was lovely. I still think it's beautiful. Um, but then to translate it into this 200, 200, 200 required things that meant totally redesigning the vehicle. And they knew that, which is why they hired me. And not just me, others.
But
Um,
they didn't realize how drastic that had to be, correct?
I think they did understand how drastic that had to be.
Oh, okay.
I think what it was, I think if there was friction right from the start, it was that there's often, and this, I take responsibility here. Head of design, design director, whatever the title is, doesn't matter. But if you're responsible for industrial design, you're not just responsible for hiring a team and doing the actual design work yourself or with your team. You're responsible for embedding, I use that term, stay with me, culture of design. Most engineers who come from outside automotive do not understand the role of industrial design. They think that industrial design is, I'm the engineer, I made the thing, and now you're going to put clothes on the thing. You're just going to make it look nice. It's like, no, that's okay if it's a toaster or, something, this laptop that's sitting on the, but, even with the laptop, why is Apple so dominant? Because design is part of the creative process from the start. It's dictating where things are. architecturally, that the keys look a certain way, feel a certain way, that there isn't a random haphazard series of openings on the side. That's why a Dell is ugly and doesn't have the market share of Apple. The Dell computer is excellent. It's probably better than the Apple computer in terms of horsepower, but it's not desirable. It's not fun to use. And
It feels cheap and plasticky,
it
where
feels cheap,
the
and it
Apple
feels
feels
like
good.
you, the human, were an afterthought, and a bunch
Yeah.
of engineers were saying, "Sorry, you must conform to my machine." I drive a Ford Mach-E. It's very much like that. It's clear that the engineers run the show at Ford, and the design team is subservient to that because that was not a vehicle designed for human beings. It was designed. It looks great. It doesn't work. Um, but I digress. The culture at Damon was engineering led, which is fine, which is great. And they asked design to come in at the like seventh inning of a 9 inning, baseball game.
Right.
And then asked design to do something that would have required the full 9 innings. And that's not an excuse. Those are the facts. And, the point is the hyperdrive went on to be postponed and postponed. In the end, I had all kinds of time. And I should have intuited that engineering was not on time. They had never hit a single deadline and hit a gate on schedule. But at the time I was new and I was like trying to impress. Anyway, we moved forward. I hired people. I hired a bunch of designers, 2 industrial designers, a couple of CAD technicians. The team that was there and the CAD team that was there was really very good. And we worked well together. We built a studio in the basement, the ground floor of this building, and it was nice. I was well paid. We were all well paid. Um, and we had the right tools, which is rare in startups. We were given the space physically and the tools to do our jobs. And the atmosphere inside the company was very optimistic, very hopeful, not just about the company, but about what we were doing. There was a lot of pride, an authentic pride, like not arrogance. There was arrogance certainly at some levels of the leadership, but there was a lot of pride in what we were doing because we were doing something that, frankly, a lot of OEMs had promised and weren't delivering. Now they weren't delivering on because they knew that promise was a little bit absurd. Um,
Right.
but it was exciting, and we were marching towards a bunch of different goals, and the marketing demand was huge. Like people kept making pre-orders. People wanted this motorcycle. I was very motivated.
Can you give me a sense of how things sort of went off the rails? Because you've sort of laid out the challenges, and yet you had the resources, you had good people. And I think this isn't just the Damon story. This is a lot of different motorcycle companies.
Mhm.
This is Livewire, who had the infinite resources of Harley Davidson, and so many other startups in all sorts of industries. And so I think this is a microcosm of what happens, as you wrote, writ large about a lot of different companies. So take me through how things started to sort of unravel in a way with your involvement with Damon.
Well, I don't need to dwell on my personal story, but I would say, the unraveling was always there. Um, as I said, engineering kept missing deadlines because that project would have been ambitious for a Honda to do. The world's largest OEM with thousands of skilled engineers, everything in house.
Yeah.
That would have been difficult to do. How do I know that? How do we know that? Because Honda did try to do that through Mugen and their electric race bike that they went to the Isle of Man TT several times. They won many times. And at one point realized we reached a wall. With current technology, this is as far as an electric race bike can go. That was 2011, 12, 13. And then by 2014, they were like, okay, there's nothing left to do here until there's a step change. So, when Honda says basta, like we there's a limit here. At the same time, you said this is not uncommon. It isn't. I said at the start, this is the most competitive business in mobility, more than cars, because there are so many brands. There's so many uh, uh, um, vehicles to choose from.
You're speaking of the powered two-wheeler market.
Motorcycles, writ large.
Right.
Combustion, electric, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's so many, it's so hard to do. So, the unraveling of Damon, I think, was baked into the cake from day one when they decided they were going to be a manufacturer. Because again, super important. The company was founded as a software hardware business, that they were focusing on halo, radar, haptics, things that would give you 360. That is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. You can go, they advertise there've been articles about it on EDV Rider.
Yeah.
Chigi and others where you spend $600-800 and you get cameras and radars, and you put a little thing on your dashboard and it tells you where you can see behind you, and, active cruise control. Now it's a $600, aftermarket thing. Damon was ahead by years, and they had patents and a lot of really cool developments there. That was rock solid. And that's where I believe, and I'm not the right person to ask, but the leadership, I think, made most of their capital raising on the back of that.
In other words, that's what investors were most interested in, was the adaptability and the saleability of that technology, not so much the motorcycle.
It was a tech company. It was always a tech company.
Right.
And I think that to answer your question succinctly, I think the unraveling of Damon was when they made the decision to make a motorcycle and then let their passions get the better of them, as I think we all do.
Yes.
It started off with, we're going to make a motorcycle and it's going to have these, shift and whatever, and it's going to be electric, cool. And then we're going to make it all ourselves, including the battery, including the motor. And then it's going to be the fastest motorcycle in the world. And it's going to go 200 miles an hour. And it's, and.
Right.
I think that sowed the seeds of whatever failure may have happened, because, not may have, but the failures that happened, because that is a whole other industry, a very competitive one. And, missing milestones is pretty common, as I said, outside of Japan and maybe some German companies. But it's unforgiving in hardware, in motor vehicle hardware. Every season you miss, sales season you miss, you're still paying overhead. You've got, at some point, Damon had almost 100 employees, possibly more than 100. That the monthly bill for salaries, for rent, for tax, for, health insurance, huge.
Yeah.
And still no money coming in. And, you talked about Livewire. Livewire was a different story. Livewire was always about motorcycles. It was never about technology. And that's what makes the Livewire story so galling, is like, it's Harley Davidson in conjunction with Kimco, another multi-billion-dollar, well-established, motorcycle manufacturer. These were serious people, smart people. And they had crafted this story to investors that they were going to sell tens of thousands and eventually 100,000 electric motorcycles in 5 years. Damon, to their credit, never said that.
Right.
But they did say they were going to deliver this technology, and I think the unraveling was more and more resources had to be devoted to this dwindling target, which was to manufacture this super ambitious motorcycle, rather than maybe delivering on the software hardware promise, which had an outlet. But I wasn't involved at the high level of business development. I was told, design this motorcycle, make it go 200 miles an hour. And, the chief problem of which was, you could go fast or you could go far, but you can't do both unless you get this, basically create the most aerodynamic motorcycle in the history of motorcycling, and do it in 6 months.
I think the question of aerodynamics, which I found really interesting in what I've read about your experience at Damon, is really sort of indicative of some of the challenges that you're up against in making a thing. And one of the things that I read that was most interesting is that to make something go that quickly, because motorcycles are not good aerodynamically. But you're also, and this is what I found really interesting, is that you're up against this issue of contemporary style and then aerodynamic reality, because it doesn't matter what you think aerodynamics should look like. A 59 Cadillac is the most aerodynamic vehicle ever made in that matter. The higher the fin, the better the aerodynamics. Yeah. But the reality that you were up against in that to design something with an extremely low coefficient of drag would make something that would look horribly outdated. And I mean, that was like, it's an impossible thing to work through, isn't it?
It is, and really, this is the thing. Aerodynamics is very misunderstood because it's fluid dynamics. It's a branch of fluid dynamics. And look, I'm not a engineer or an aerodynamicist, but I have worked on race bikes at the highest level for a long time, and I've worked with people who are fluid dynamics experts in Japan, in Europe, and also in Canada. Air air is like your very conservative uncle. Air does not wants to be left alone and wants to have the right of way, okay? Um, it's like, don't disturb air, and if you're gonna disturb air, do so gently, and then once you're past it, you know, it wants to continue on its original path. Cars can be made very aerodynamic because they're enclosed volume. Um, you know, a bullet train can go as fast as it can, or an aircraft because it's an enclosed volume, rockets. Motorcycle is an enclosed volume and then it's an open volume. What I mean is the fairing has to be cut because there's this monkey draped on top, which is called a human being, which was designed to walk, maybe jog, but not go much quicker than that.
Yeah.
Suddenly, air is asked to navigate shoulders and feet and all the negative space, the dead space between the fairing and you. And that's turbulence. And turbulence, the sound you hear on your motorcycle when you're going fast, and you open the windows of your car, that's turbulent air. Turbulent air is like thousands of little fingers pulling you back, holding back and generating a lot of resistance. So if you look at small Grand Prix motorcycles, that's the path. Big bulbous fairing in the front, very wide, very tall at the top, and super narrow and deep at the bottom. Huge front fender. Suzuki Hayabusa, street bike. Look at the fairing. Same thing. Bulbous, big front fender. The front fender goes beyond the top of the tire to almost cover half of the front
Yeah,
tire.
yeah.
Land speed record bikes, long tails. I could go on.
But very unhip to today's
Ugly.
consumer. Yeah, ugly, yeah.
Ugly. Look,
Ugly.
ugly. I mean, there's a certain beauty in a speed form, but an F-104 Starfighter is I think a beautiful shape, but it's a needle
Yeah, yeah.
because it's going Mach 2. Motorcycle, to make it look good, we want to have that pointy tail and lots of open space around the wheels. We want to make it look light, visually light. All of this invites drag. So, the bike that Damon had presented was a modern interpretation of sport bike with these beautiful flowing curves, but very minimal, very narrow, very short up front, like low. And it had a high pointy tail. Brutal aerodynamically. And we ran the simulation and it was brutal. It was like a naked motorcycle. It was a naked motorcycle. Even with the rider in the prone position, the rider was basically exposed. So it was, in order to correct that, we had to enlarge the fairing significantly. There's just no other trick.
Yeah, yeah.
It's physics. And you can cheat and lie on a computer game and you can, create stuff in CGI, but the laws of the physical world are what they are. And so I was really proud of where the clay model that the team and I made together that summer in 2021, it was starting to look as good as it could. Um, I don't think it was beautiful, but I do think it was brutal in a cool way. It definitely had the lines of the Bachego bike, the first Damon bike, the key lines. And I think we did the absolute best thing we could with the tail, given that it had a radar unit and it's at the extremity of the back that was the size of a VR headset.
Oh, boy.
So, like, imagine beneath the passenger seat on a sport bike, you have to put this big, very blocky, very square electronic device and then somehow shroud it I mean, I described it as looking like the bike had a full diaper. And the only way we could kind of optically deal with it was make it matte black and then have the high gloss yellow body show that fine ridge point and hope that it would sort of vanish, disappear into the background. And I thought we did a pretty decent job. And the clay model photos are on my Substack for anyone who's curious. Um, and the aerodynamic CD was getting towards the bottom of to the best of what is possible with a street bike. Before R&D on that direction ended.
I'm guessing that this experience with Damon really reinforced something that you hammer on about a lot, which is that there has to be a structure and there has to be discipline. And you were given a sort of a firsthand experience of what happens when that doesn't happen. Can you just take us through really and just reinforce this idea of there are ways to do things and there are sort of ways not to do things. And ultimately you come up against a certain reality. And what is that reality?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're cooking a banquet or you're designing a motorcycle or you're, whatever, doing your year-end accounting, there are lots of ways to do things, but there's usually like a disciplined approach of like preparing your tools, doing the homework, the reading before, the research, getting the right tools and people for each task in advance before you get into the meat of the task is always going to be a more efficient way to do a project. I will reiterate that making motorcycles is very, very hard.
At the best of times.
It's hard for Honda.
Yeah.
No, and I haven't worked at Honda, but I have worked at Yamaha and a lot of other large OEMs. Um, it's hard at the big OEMs that have been doing it for 60, 80 years. It's hard because look, and I think this is the key lesson of, something like Damon and a lot of other failures in the motorcycle business, including combustion failures. Let's be honest, Polaris Industries, profitable, successful company, in a lot of different industries, they never made motorcycles work for them. Victory was a business failure. Indian was a business failure. Indian's been a business failure since 1950. 7 different iterations of that company. Not because there wasn't enough people, smart people, money. Process discipline means looking really cold-heartedly at what is the goal? Where are we going? And asking the simple, hard question. Is this achievable with what we have? And then being really honest. Can we pull this off? And even if we do, will we be able to sustain it? Can we make money doing this? And I think the key fallibility here, of which I am totally guilty, on occasion, certainly with Damon, is we're emotional, and nobody gets into the motorcycle business because it's just, it seemed like kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Like
you don't fall into it. It's something you love and something you go after.
it's something you go after, and I could have made a lot more, let's say, uh, financially wise career decisions, as I'm sure a lot of engineers and people I know in the motorcycle business would agree, all around the world. It only works when you stick to the rules and you understand that as we, meaning humans, have been making motorcycles for 140 years. This is not a new thing.
Yeah.
Knowledge exists. Trials and errors have been made, and we can learn from the past. We can learn from the present. We have to go into this task with humility and respect for the industry. Not respect because like it's an old boys club and we gotta, no, respect that this is hard for everyone. And to do it well requires, like, the only thing that'll get you through it. It's like soldiers in a war. The only thing that's going to get you through today is remember your training, look out for one another, stay together, and focus on the goal. Don't get distracted and, brace yourself for the the randomness of things that you can't predict, and fall back on your training, fall back on some sort of sensible plan. And yet we're all insensible when it comes to motorcycles. I think, to go back to the Livewire or Polaris with Indian, I think a lot of people got really excited. Oh my gosh, this heritage brand, I'm talking about Indian, Victory didn't work. 20 plus years of selling motorcycles, and they were only profitable 3 out of those years. Okay, so Victory, we're going to close that down. Lessons learned. What were we missing? We needed a passion. We need a brand that people were cared about. Okay, maybe. And then a decade of spending hundreds of millions on Indian to not make money. And people will argue, but that bike was this or that. It's a business. In the end, it's a business, and it didn't work. And the proof is that Polaris washed their hands of the whole business,
Yeah.
just like 7 other previous or 8 other previous owners. It's hard. And I think with Damon, and I will speak for myself, I can't speak for others. I felt after 1 week that I had stepped into something unpleasant. I loved my coworkers, genuinely, and I have hired many of them to work with me on projects afterwards. I am friends with several, including Dom, the co-founder. I met amazing people. We did some really great work. My aerodynamicist, who I only met him for the first time last year, but we've been pretty good friends virtually because we met in that crazy project in Vancouver, trying to sculpt a, F-104 out of a pig. Um, so it was a wonderful experience, but like I said, I could sense right away that there was a layer of chaos. And after I left, what has been published, what is known, published and presented by many people, including people at the leadership level, Damon themselves, was that things postponed, got canceled, postponed, moved on. We tried again last year. We did a from scratch new vehicle, of which I'm very proud, with E&E in Bologna. And the reality is that passion will only carry you so far. At the end of the day, money talks. It's a business. And if you cannot make the vehicle at a price people are willing to pay, then you're not a business, you're a hobby. And the danger of the motorcycle industry is sometimes we all drink the Kool-Aid. And it's great. This is why I believe people listening are motorcyclists. Because motorcycles are crazy. The world made any sense, these things wouldn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're unsafe. They're kind of like they can't stand up on their own. They have no wind or body protection. I mean, they're very efficient. They're a very efficient way to go from A to B. There's no question about that on the low end. But we love them because they're a little irrational, and I'd love to end on this because I think this is important. There are lessons learned here, yes, but the main thing is let's not forget why we wake up in the morning and do this. Remember when you were, I don't know, a child and you first rode a bicycle without help, without training wheels? That feeling that this thing, this two-wheeled vehicle with a handlebar, was at your command. And it could do something that no car could, that no roller coaster ride can. You control this unstable thing that makes you feel the wind, feel the corner. When you take a corner on your bicycle for the first time, you're a superhero. And then we become adults and we get to do that on a motorcycle. It could be a 100cc Bajaj Pulsar. Doesn't matter. You feel that same freedom and excitement on a motorcycle. And so the people who work in this business, from accounting to engineering to design, finance, we all get that heady cocktail. And it's important for those of us in the business, and this is our responsibility, is to remain calm and cold-blooded about it. And that's fundamentally the services I sell is an external third view to come in dispassionately, because I don't have skin in the game, to say, I'm looking in from the outside and I see this and this and this as potential problems. And if they aren't, terrific. But if they are, I've just potentially saved you a lot of money. And my story with Damon was I was on the outside, I went inside, and I got as excited about it as anybody else. And we
Yeah.
came very close to succeeding, certainly the second time. Um, But at the end of the day, passion is not what makes businesses work.
But it also it reiterated the service that you sell, doesn't it? That you have to this duality, which is really difficult. Humans are not good at dualities. We're not good at having passion and then stepping back and looking at it clinically. It's not something we're naturally attuned to, I don't think.
I mean, some cultures more than others, and without being overly stereotypical, I mean, it's like there's a reason why there is a cliche around German engineering or Japanese, engineering. Those are very passionate people like any other humans. It's just that they have a built-in cultural sense of duty towards the team that is maybe stronger than with a lot of other cultures. And, their magnificent obsession with mechanical perfection, um, is, acts as a bulwark towards against these passions. Yet they still produce absurd vehicles like the 911 and the BMW Boxer, um, you know, and isn't it great that they do?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, the GS is a ridiculous motorcycle. It objectively absurd. And, without it, there'd be no BMW Motorrad, and millions of people would be a lot less happy.
Yeah.
So, I think you have to have passion to make something successful in this business. Everything can't be a Honda Cub. And, but it's important to point out that without the Honda Cub, you don't get the modern motorcycle industry. You don't get to have the fun, quirky stuff. You got to pay the bills. And most people just want a Cub, whether it's literally or figuratively. Most people want their motorcycle to just be fair value, reliable, good dealer experience, you know, designed for human, to make it, nice to use, ergonomic, et cetera, et cetera. And to do that, to do the Honda thing requires, I would say, obsessive focus on discipline.
Right. It's an amazing story, Michael. Thank you so much for opening up about Damon and telling us more about the vehicles that we love.
Just doing my bit.
All right, take care.
Thanks.
As always, thank you again for listening to the Lowdown Radio Show presented by advrider.com.